looking to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. Israeli forces are advancing well inside Gaza City with one as their goal: Hamas. Israel's deadliest war in Gaza, sparked by the October 7 Hamas attacks, has entered its second month. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated no ceasefire until the militant group releases its 240 hostages. Meanwhile, 40 Filipinos left the war-torn Gaza Strip for Egypt, with President Marcos Jr. announcing their successful and safe passage. President Marcos Jr. will embark on his third trip to the United States next week to attend a series of important events, including the 2023 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC Leaders Meeting in San Francisco, California. And a decade after Super Typhoon Haiyan devastated the central Philippines, leaving more than 7,000 people dead or missing, survivors commemorate the disaster. Leading the 10th anniversary of the Super Typhoon Yolanda's or Haiyan onslaught is President Marcos Jr. Israel's deadliest war in Gaza, sparked by the October 7 Hamas attacks, has entered its second month. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated no ceasefire until the militant group releases its 240 hostages. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, the number of deaths in Gaza has risen past 10,000, with the majority of victims being civilians.
ظهر انه بيستهدف البيت اللي فيه اعداد كبيره وكله انتقام. فهذا هو البيت، هاي مثال 45 شهيد فيه ومحدش نجي. هذا بيت واحد، هذا طابقين بس، فما بالك لو كان 5 و6 طوابق حيكون فوق ال 100 فرد فيه.
UN Rights Commissioner Volker Turk lamented a month of carnage, of incessant suffering, bloodshed, destruction, outrage, and despair.
It's the 1 month anniversary of this incredible escalation of violence that we have seen. I'm, of course, from a human rights perspective, extremely worried about the situation, about what is happening, and it is really important that a solution is found to end the violence and to get out of this horrible, horrible humanitarian and human rights situation for what's happening in Gaza.
Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. Hundreds of girls and boys are reportedly being killed or injured every day.
On average of about 160 children are killed every day. Today marks indeed a very grim date. It's 1 month since the horrific attacks on mainly civilians in Israel and the abduction of 240 reportedly mainly civilians. Nothing justifies the horrific attacks by Hamas and other armed groups on the 7th of October that targeted Israeli civilians mainly, and nothing justifies this. The level of death and suffering is hard to fathom. Over 1,400 people have reportedly died in Israel, and just over 11,000 have now been reported dead in Gaza. That's 0.5% of the population of Gaza.
Israel will assume overall security in Gaza after the war ends, allowing for tactical pauses to free captives and deliver aid. Prime Minister Netanyahu has stated that a ceasefire won't occur until the hostages are released, despite increasing calls for one.
אני מדגיש, אין כניסת דלק, אין כניסת פועלים, ולא תהיה הפסקת אש ללא שחרור חטופינו.
According to his statements, Israel will take up overall security in Gaza following the conclusion of the conflict, with the possibility of tactical pauses in order to release prisoners and provide humanitarian relief to the 2.4 million people living under blockade. Yet, Washington declared that it was against Israel occupying Gaza for an extended period of time.
And Gaza is Palestinian land, and it will remain Palestinian land. And generally speaking, we do not support reoccupation of Gaza, and neither does Israel. Secretary Blinken was fairly clear about that during his travels as well.
Israel has essentially split Gaza in half since the onslaught by launching over 12,000 airstrikes and artillery strikes, in addition to sending in ground soldiers. Although Israel has ordered civilians in northern Gaza to evacuate southward using airdrop leaflets and text messages, a U.S. official stated on Saturday that at least 350,000 civilians were still in the worst-hit regions. In the meantime, Israel is arranging for a DVD that shows the October 7th slaughter of hundreds of Israeli civilians to be screened for media outlets worldwide. Now, the film is made up of uncut footage that was obtained from both the perpetrators and the victims. The terrifying 44-minute montage has already been screened for the press in Paris on Tuesday after being exhibited at the UN in New York and Geneva, as well as in Washington, Berlin, Brussels, Madrid, and Santiago, Chile.
The kidnapping, the hostages. We have 241 hostages held in Gaza by the Hamas. It's intolerable. It's something that one could really, we cannot stand it. I cannot think about the families. They have no clue. They know nothing about their family members. Some of them, as I mentioned, are kids, babies.
Meanwhile, 74 out of 400 residents of the Nir Oz kibbutz are either missing or have been taken hostage. Survivor Erit Lahav recalls the October 7 attacks and the impact they had on her community.
And we were still hoping that they would not come to our safe rooms door, but they did. And they tried and tried and tried to open, and they were getting angry and shouting and banging and, so trying really violently, but they couldn't open it. They couldn't open it. At that time, we really thought they will open it. So we were laid down under the table, dark, and we just held each other's hands and said goodbye words to each other. My daughter was saying to me how much she loves me and she appreciates all I've done for her, and I told her how much I love her, and I'm so thankful for all the years we've been together, and just say good, beautiful goodbye words when they were trying and screaming and shouting and banging the door.
Meanwhile, hundreds of demonstrators demonstrate in front of the Israeli parliament, calling for the government to take action in order to free the hostages who were taken by Hamas militants during the October 7 attacks and are being detained in the Gaza Strip. Take a look.
There is no excuse to what happened, and today the number one mission of the entire world is to bring back the abducted hostages, all of them, back to their homes, back to their people, back to where they belong, outside the tunnels.
The highest priority is to bring the hostages, no matter what, even if it involves to switch to release all prisoners, not only Hamas, all Palestinian prisoners for exchange of the hostages. I think it's
Meanwhile, 40 Filipinos left the war-torn Gaza Strip for Egypt, with President Marcos Jr. announcing their successful and safe passage.
Nagagalak kong ibalita na 4 na po sa ating mga kababayan ay ligtas at matagumpay na nakatawid ng Rafah crossing sa Egypt mula sa Israel. Sila ngayon ay patungo sa Cairo, kung saan sila magmumula para makauwi ng tuluyan sa ating bansa sa susunod na mga araw. Naisaayos natin ito dahil sa pagtutulungan ng Department of Foreign Affairs at ng ating mga embahada sa Israel, sa Jordan at Egypt upang maisakatuparan ang pagtulong sa ating mga kababayan. Nagpapasalamat din tayo sa mga pamahalaan ng Israel at Egypt sa kanilang pagbibigay prioridad sa ating mga kababayan upang makalabas ng kanilang teritoryo. Kinikilala din natin ang mediation effort ng Qatar na siyang naging dahilan upang nagbukas muli ang mga border ng mga naturang bansa. Umaasa ako na yung natitirang kababayan na nagnanais ding makauwi, makakatawid na ng maayos kasama ang kanilang mga asawa at mahal sa buhay. Magbibigay uli ang aking tanggapan ng kaukulang balita tungkol sa mga pangyayaring ito.
Now, President Marcos Jr. will embark on his third trip to the United States next week to attend a series of important events, including the 2023 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC Leaders Meeting in San Francisco, California. Undersecretary Charles Jose of the Department of Foreign Affairs emphasized the significance of the President's participation in the November 17 summit, highlighting the Philippines' role as a founding member and stating that it will serve as a key platform for the administration to engage with other Asia-Pacific economies.
As we all know, the Philippines is a founding member of APEC in 1989. APEC is important to the Philippines because it is the primary forum for our engagement with the other economies in the Asia-Pacific region. 11 of our top 15 trading partners are APEC members. APEC economies account for 85% of our total exports and imports and about 56% of the foreign direct investments that enter the Philippines.
The summit's theme, Creating a Resilient and Sustainable Future for All, aligns with the Philippine Development Plan.
This year's APEC theme aligns with the economic agenda of the administration of President Marcos Jr., the Philippine Development Plan, and the administration's 8-point socio-economic agenda envisage an economic transformation for a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient Philippines by prioritizing the creation of more quality and green jobs.
In addition to the APEC Leaders Meeting, President Marcos will also participate in the APEC CEO Summit and the APEC Leaders Dialogue alongside the APEC Business Advisory Council, or ABAC.
For this year, the President is keen to push for financing a just, sustainable, and affordable energy transition through partnerships with the business sector. He will emphasize the need to invest more on clean energy to preserve and protect the environment while ensuring that we are energy secure and sufficient. With our experience from the COVID-19 pandemic, the President wishes to push for deeper cooperation in health and modernizing health systems, and to ensure that our health professionals are recognized and provided with welfare they deserve.
Beyond economic cooperation, the Philippine leader underscored the need to address climate change. President Marcos Jr. will also champion innovation and digitization.
The President will also touch on digitalization and innovation, given that digital transformation is already upon us, and how we can best prepare our workforce and the larger human resource. Like in the previous year, the President will push for the digital participation of our MSMEs. The President will continue to push for cooperation in food security, particularly focusing on research and development, innovation, and equity and inclusivity, so as to benefit our small farmers, and in climate action, given the urgent need to be resilient to climate change.
A particularly noteworthy aspect of the President's trip is his planned visit to the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command headquarters at Pearl Harbor, Oahu.
The President is being invited to visit the Indo-Pacific Pacific Command, and he will also have a roundtable discussion with the Daniel Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies.
He is expected to meet with Admiral John Aquilino, the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and participate in a roundtable discussion with Daniel K. Inouye, Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies. The President's visit comes amidst rising tensions in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines. As a long-standing military partner, the U.S. has reaffirmed its ironclad commitment to defend the Philippines in the event of Chinese aggression over the territorial dispute. President Marcos Jr. will depart for the U.S. on November 14 and is scheduled to return to Manila on November 20, and this will be his 18th foreign trip since assuming the presidency. President Joe Biden will welcome Indonesian President Joko Widodo to the White House on November 13 for a bilateral meeting aimed at bolstering the decades-old partnership between the two nations.
As we announced a short time ago, President Biden will host President Joko Widodo of Indonesia for a bilateral meeting at the White House on Monday, November 13th. During the visit, President Biden will reaffirm the United States' commitment to deepening our nearly 75-year-long partnership between the world's second and third largest democracies. The leaders will explore opportunities to enhance cooperation on the clean energy transition, advance economic prosperity, bolster regional peace and stability, and reinforce our people-to-people ties. The two leaders will also coordinate on efforts to reinforce ASEAN centrality and uphold international law and promote a free and open Indo-Pacific.
The White House meeting will also coincide with the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC Summit being held November 12th to the 18th in San Francisco. With more frequent extreme weather events and the world warming faster than at any other time in recorded history, human health is increasingly threatened, according to a new multi-agency report coordinated by the UN World Meteorological Organization, which focused its 2023 annual report State of Climate series on health.
The impacts of climate change on health are wide-ranging, affecting the determinants of health, from social behaviors to water safety, to air quality and food security. And we see that it is the most vulnerable countries that are impacted the most by climate change.
The analysis, which incorporates input from more than 30 collaborating partners, demonstrates that scientific know-how and resources, such as early warning coverage, can make a substantial difference in people's daily lives, but aren't widely available or exploited. By 2030, the number of medium or large-scale disaster incidents is expected to rise to 560 per year, or 1.5 per day. According to the analysis, catastrophe mortality is 8 times greater in nations with inadequate early warning coverage than in those with substantial to comprehensive coverage. According to the analysis, the predicted number of deaths due to heat between 2000 and 2019 was around 489,000 each year, with Asia 45% and Europe 36% bearing the most burden.
The impacts of extreme heat are quite severe, with up to 500,000 people being impacted with excess mortality related to extreme heat around the world.
Food insecurity threats are being exacerbated by climate change. Extreme drought affected 29% more global land area from 2012 to 2021 than it did from 1951 to 1960.
In the Horn of Africa, during the past 3 years, we had very severe food insecurity situation, which was related to both heat and drought. And quite often in these episodes, when we have heat waves, we have also fairly poor air quality. For example, in 2003, when we got 75,000 casualties in Europe, at the same time, the surface ozone concentrations were very high.
Heat waves, according to the paper, increase air pollution, which is already responsible for an estimated 7 million premature deaths each year, and is the fourth leading cause of death by health risk factor.
The real solution will be to stop the problem, so the cause of the problem, which is the combustion of fossil fuels. And this is for the health community, this is extremely important, because the combustion of those fossil fuels are not only contributing to greenhouse gases emissions, but as well to air pollution.
According to Dr. Neira, the calamity hasn't only immediate repercussions, but also widespread displacement.
We are creating conditions for more non-communicable diseases, lung cancer, chronic respiratory infections, because of the bad quality of the air we breathe. Immediate consequences because of the disaster, but as well because there will be massive displacement. They will maybe be responsible for destruction of the land with agricultural production, and therefore we will see malnutrition and massive mental health issues as well that we are seeing. If you have all of these extreme weather events or global warming, you will have more difficult to access water services, and that will be responsible as well for a massive increase on waterborne diseases. We are seeing an increase on cholera outbreaks around the world, by the way.
Climate change is also hastening the spread of numerous climatically sensitive pathogenic vector, food and waterborne diseases. Dengue fever, for example, is the world's fastest spreading vector-borne disease, and the length of the malaria transmission season has lengthened in several parts of the world. A decade after Super Typhoon Haiyan devastated the central Philippines, leaving more than 7,000 people dead or missing, survivors are preparing to commemorate the disaster. The storm, which made landfall in November 2013, was one of the most powerful ever recorded, with winds reaching up to 315 kilometers per hour. It left a trail of destruction, flattening homes, businesses, and entire communities. Many survivors lost everything they had, including their homes, their livelihoods, and their loved ones. In the aftermath of the storm, they faced immense challenges as they tried to rebuild their lives. The Boy Scout ID card that belonged to Julia Tanega's son, Stephen, age 10, is still kept in a jewelry box. Days after the family's jeepney in Tacloban City was destroyed by enormous storm surges, she discovered the laminated card in a tree. When the family did decide to leave, the jeepney would not start since they had disregarded the evacuation instructions. Tanega remembers gripping Stephen's hand as they battled the flood of seawater to keep afloat. The remains of Stephen and two of her other children were never found.
Lagi kong na-imagine ba kung sakali na buhay sila ngayon, malalaki na sila. May binata sa dalaga na sana.
Today, Tacloban bears little resemblance to the city that was ravaged by Haiyan. An 18-kilometer seawall has been built along the coast to protect it against future storm surges, and the city streets are bustling with activity. Mayor Alfred Romualdez believes that the city has fully recovered from the disaster.
In terms of recovery, I think we've fully recovered, and we're actually we've attained also our local income before, and we've almost increased, almost doubled it. In fact, you can see that the establishments are flourishing. I feel in terms of the national government and in terms of the local government, there were a lot of lessons learned, but I would say that there's still many more lessons we still have to learn, and we have to institutionalize.
However, he acknowledges that the survivors will never forget what they experienced.
I think people have moved on sooner than now. They moved on. But I don't think they'll ever forget throughout their lifetime.
Now, leading the 10th anniversary of Super Typhoon Yolanda's or Haiyan's onslaught was President Marcos Jr. When the president first arrived in the area, he went to the Tacloban Area Convention Center, also known as the Astrodome, which was formerly the largest makeshift refuge for survivors.
10 years have gone by, and yet the memory of this tragedy remains indelible in our hearts and in our thoughts. The devastation we suffered included over 6,000 lives lost, over 28,000 injured, over 1,000 missing, and over 3 million families affected. And to this day, we still do not know the true scope of our loss. But we must always keep a special place in our hearts for those who we lost, who are uncounted, who are unrecorded, so that up to now, we say 6,000 casualties. We do not know that for sure. We are certain that there were more, but for whatever reason, their deaths have not been recorded. So even if that is the case, let them not be unremembered. Our now DNR secretary, who was then in the Manila Observatory, nauna po siya. They were the first to forecast how strong Yolanda was going to become. And we could not believe the figures that she was saying, that umabot ng 370-kilometer gusts. And up to now, we have not seen that kind of weather anywhere around the world. And that is why we have now recognized that this was the onset of the worst effects of climate change. Alam nyo, yung pinaghirapan po natin, the suffering that we went through during Yolanda will not go to naught because we have shown the rest of the country and the rest of the world what needs to be done. The suffering that we went through is now a bellwether of what the world needs to face when we talk about climate change.
In addition, the president oversaw the issuance of titles to Yolanda survivors who benefited from the housing project funded by the federal government. Finally, in our news, Europe's Euclid Space Telescope has released its first images, revealing a nebula resembling a horse's head, never before seen distant galaxies, and even evidence of elusive dark matter. Euclid blasted off in July on a mission to investigate the cosmic mysteries of dark matter and dark energy. It'll do so by charting 1/3 of the sky, encompassing 2 billion galaxies, to create the most accurate 3D map of the universe ever. The first 5 images were unveiled, including a majestic shot of the nearby Horsehead Nebula, as well as spiral and irregular galaxies. But the most exciting image for the team was the one of the Perseus cluster, a distant collection of more than 1,000 galaxies. Lurking in the background of the cluster are more than 100,000 additional galaxies, and some of which are 10 billion light years away and have never been seen before. Euclid is different from other space telescopes because it takes in a very wide field of view, allowing it to capture broad images extremely quickly.
So the goal of the Euclid mission is to really understand 95% of the universe, the nature of which we don't understand yet. We think part of that 95% is the thing called dark matter, which is gravitating material that is not emitting light. So we haven't seen it with our telescopes, but actually we see the effect of it. It pulls our galaxies to spin too quickly. We think it pulls material together to form galaxy clusters. And so we will actually look at the effects of dark matter over vast areas of the sky back to 10 billion years in cosmic history. And the other question that we want to answer is the nature of the expansion of the universe, which we know from nearby supernova studies is accelerating. So it's not just expanding, but it's speeding up. We want to know whether that's true across cosmic time. And we also want to look at the fundamental physics of the early universe and how that is now encoded in the structures that we see in the universe today. So this mission is the one of a kind to map vast areas of the sky back to 10 billion years. And it's going to be a huge number crunching and analysis problem for our scientists, who we will now hand the baton onto in the next few weeks now that we've done the engineering verifications. To be honest, my first reaction was I took a sharp intake of breath. I mean, there's just a moment. I feel goosebumps now even talking about it. Just that first moment where you don't know what you're going to see and you just look and you think breathtaking and even better than we could have imagined. So a really special day today, and I hope everybody who sees these images have that same feeling. And I would encourage scientists, general public, anybody who wants to examine these images to go to our website, and you can even dig into the data on our ESA Sky portal and do your own science with the images that we have putting out today.
Perfect. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Abal Maangeles, stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.